أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي رب زدني علما. Today, as you know, we are going to start with verse number 130 of Surah Aale Imran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu la ta'kulur riba adafan mudafatan wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. O you who believe, do not devour usury, doubling and quadrupling it. Fear God so that you might be successful. So the word usury or riba means interest. This is sometimes interest is used maybe in a good sense like profit, but usury implies some kind of exploitation. So generally it is forbidden. Riba is of course forbidden in very strong words. This is because very often an economically weak person is being exploited when he borrows from an economically strong person. And how is he exploited? There are several ways in which this exploitation is carried out. First thing is that it is given out on interest. The loan is given out on interest, and the rate of interest is fixed. Supposing I want to start a small business and I don't even have experience of that business, and I borrow money and I'm supposed to pay 10% interest per annum. Now at the end of the day, maybe I make a loss, or I maybe don't make 10% profit. So 10% goes just to the lender or whatever has been fixed, and the rest, that means you don't get anything for yourself. You don't earn anything. So that is one thing, that the rate of interest is fixed in riba. Then the time frame for the return of the loan is also fixed very rigidly. They say if you don't return this money, for example, the woman who works in my house says that they give out the loan for a month, and if you can't return the money in 1 month, then that plus the interest has to be returned in 1 month. If you don't return it, then all that becomes a capital loan, and then you have to pay interest on the total amount. So this way it becomes like compound interest, that the interest becomes the capital. There is no provision, which I just mentioned, there is no provision for the loss that the borrower might incur. But most scholars also agree that the interest you get from a bank, if you open an account and you open a savings account maybe, then you get an interest on it. And most Islamic scholars think that interest is riba. Well, I feel that the Muslim scholars internationally should get together and they should decide and give a definition of riba, because these days it's impossible for you not to deal with a bank, because if somebody is earning 100,000 rupees a day, or at least that is his cash flow, he can't keep it at home. He can't dig a hole in the house and bury it. He has to keep it in the bank. And most people who think that interest and dealing with the bank is haram, they say that even keeping your money in the bank, even if you're not taking an interest on it, that is also haram. They say doing a job in a bank is haram. So these things are a bit difficult to understand, and I think the scholars should give a clear definition about it when it is something so important. Now here it is said, do not devour usury, doubling and quadrupling it. That means that this person is earning money on money without any effort, without doing any business. And his money becomes the business. So this is not considered to be a good thing to do. I had a friend, and she had a maid who had borrowed money from some money lender, and she was getting deeper and deeper into debt. So she said, all right, bring this money lender to me and I'll talk to him and maybe I'll pay off his loan. But when he came, he said, no, I don't want all my money back. I just want to carry on, she can just keep returning it to me, because this had become his regular income. So this is a clear case of exploitation. And if you consider what's happening to the countries internationally today, you find that even the richest countries are in debt. And they all owe money to somebody or the other. And the whole system has become quite, it's a failure, I think. So something has to be done to get out of this morass. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Fear God so that you might be successful. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ, again, this is the word from taqwa. And taqwa we have already defined in many ways. And the most common translation you find of taqwa is wattaqu, they would say, fear God. And it also means to be God conscious. It can also mean to love God so much that you are afraid of annoying God. All these meanings can be applied to this word. Fear God so that you might be successful. Fear God in the sense that God intends everything to be good for you. But if you do not obey Him, then you have some punishment waiting for you. So if you fear God and you do all the right things, then you will be successful. And we know that eternal success is going to heaven and with all the other advantages that come with it. وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. Avoid the fire prepared for the unbelievers. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. Obey God and obey the Prophet so that you might be treated with mercy. So you see, obeying the Prophet is many times it is placed like at par with obeying God. And that is because human beings on this earth are not in direct contact with God. Whatever they know about God has come to them through the teachings of the prophets. So some people say that kufr means not believing in the Prophet, because the Prophet is telling us exactly what to do. So obey God and obey the Prophet. In fact, in one place you will read that it says the one who obeys the Prophet actually obeys God, because the Prophet does not add or subtract anything on his own. He just conveys the message as he receives it. وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى الْمَغْفِرَةِ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ أَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Hurry towards salvation from your Lord and paradise, which is as broad as the heavens and the earth, prepared for the God-fearing. So, sariu, that means don't waste time. Just try to go as fast as you can. Hurry towards maghfirah, that means forgiveness. So when you are forgiven, then you are saved. That is our salvation. And then who is going to forgive us? Naturally, God, our Lord is going to forgive us. Rabbikum. So hurry towards salvation from your Lord and paradise. Naturally, if we are forgiven, then the paradise is waiting for us. And this is another description of paradise. It says it is as broad as the heavens and the earth put together. Some people have tried to calculate, how broad paradise can be, but that's, I think, a futile exercise. We can just say that it's bigger or broader than what we can even imagine. And this, of course, we know heaven, the paradise has been prepared for the God conscious, for the uiddat lil muttaqin. It has been prepared for the muttaqi people, those who are God conscious. Now, in the next verse, we are told what are the good qualities of the muttaqin. If you remember when we first read Surah Baqarah, right after Surah Fatiha, it said, Alif Lam Mim Zalikal Kitabu La Raiba Fi Hudal Lil Muttaqina. This a guidance. This Quran is a guidance for the muttaqi, those who are conscious of God. And then that verse goes on. The following verses go on to explain or to enumerate what are the good qualities of the muttaqin. Similarly, here in verse number 134, we find some of the good qualities of the God conscious. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Those, the God conscious, are those who spend in prosperity and in poverty, It's easy to spend when you are prosperous because you have some extra, wealth, but it's very difficult when you don't have enough for yourself. So that is even a higher station. So this is what these muttaqeen do. They spend in prosperity as well as in poverty. And the next thing is they control their anger. Every little thing that irritates them, they don't flare up, especially not in public, but they control their anger. And the third quality mentioned here is and forgive people. So they don't keep a grudge in their heart and they make an excuse for the other persons, and maybe he said this to me because of such and such. So he's ready to forgive people. Hazrat Ibn Abbas has mentioned, because at that time slavery had not been totally abolished, it had not died out. In fact, Islam did not abolish slavery. Islam gradually phased it out, and later on we'll discuss how it was phased out. So at that time people were extremely cruel to their slaves. Every little thing, that little excuse they could find, they would be very aggressive and violent with their slaves. In fact, this reminds me that even they were violent even with the female slaves. I remember reading that Hazrat Rabia Basri, who is one of the greatest saints that we know of, she was picked up from somewhere. She was going somewhere and somebody just, kidnapped her and sold her as a slave. So this kept happening in those days. And the person who bought her, the master, used to be very cruel to her. He used to beat her up all the time. And one night, he got up in the middle of the night and he saw a light outside in the room, and he walked in there and he saw that Rabia Basri, even as a young person, she was saying her salat, she was praying, and there was a lot of light surrounding her. So he knew that this light, in those days the light came from a lamp, an oil lamp, and there was no oil lamp around there. So he just knew that this person was special, and he got scared and then he freed her. So what I'm trying to say is that slaves were the scapegoats of people, that all their anger and frustration they would take out on their slaves. So Hazrat Ibn Abbas adds to this that the people who were muttaqi, they were especially kind to their slaves. If we don't have slaves today, a lot of people have servants or somebody who's lower in rank, and one can always think about those relationships. This last verse that we read, 134, the last part of it says, Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin. Now here we come across another word, muhsinin. Who are the muhsinin? They are the people who do ihsan. So when the companions of the Prophet came across this word for the first time, they asked him, Ya Rasulullah, what is the meaning of ihsan? So he tried to explain it by giving an example, and he said, when you're saying your prayers, you should be aware that you are looking at God, that you are seeing God. And they said, no, this is impossible. How can we imagine, how can we see God? So he said, all right, then the second best thing to do is to know that He sees you. So this is a good thing to remember when we are saying our salat. If we just become conscious of the fact that we are in the presence of God and that He's seeing us and hearing us, then our prayers will be, we will not keep forgetting, and we won't keep wandering in our mind into all kinds of thoughts and places. We will just concentrate and focus on our prayers. And it is also called namaz. The salat has been called the miraj of the faithful, of the believers, because at the miraj, the Prophet went to the highest station where most of the scholars believe that he communicated with God and he saw God. And in a similar manner, when we are doing our salat, we are in the presence of God, and even if we don't see Him, we know that He can see us. So ihsan also means to do something beyond the call of duty. If you say to somebody, you have done this ihsan on me, it means you didn't really need to do it, but you have gone out of your way. It is beyond the call of your duty that you have been so good to me. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً أَوْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ ذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا لِذُنُوبِهِمْ وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. These are the people who, when they commit a moral offense or wrong themselves, remember God and ask for forgiveness for their sins. So this is also another sign of God consciousness, of being a muttaqi, of being pious. Pious is another word for it. That as soon as one commits a wrong, one at once asks for forgiveness for one's sins, for the past sins as well as for the current sin which we have just committed. We've committed a fault, and then we sit down and we ask for forgiveness. They do not insist on the rightness of what they had done knowingly. Sorry, I left this out. Who can forgive sins but God? They do not insist on the rightness of what they had done knowingly. That means after they have committed a wrong, whether it be something saghira or kabira, small or a major fault or sin, they do not keep saying no. They don't try to come up with excuses and saying no, but it was because of this and that this happened. No, they just get down to the basic facts and they confess that yes, I'm sorry, I did this. Confess to God. If they've harmed somebody, some fellow human being, then they should confess to that person or apologize to him and say that I was wrong, I did this, please forgive me. So we see that saying sorry or apologizing or doing astaghfar, this is like a magic word. It erases. If there's a blackboard and there's a lot of different things written on it, and you can't understand one thing from another, you just clean the blackboard, and this way you start with a new slate. So and just as when we are bringing up children, there are 3 magic words which we teach them. If the child has done something that we had told him not to do, then we say sorry. And so the child learns to say sorry, to apologize, to do astaghfar. And when he wants something, we say please. That means ask God of something, we say please. For any hajat, then we say please let us have this. We request God. And also, what is the 3rd magic word? There is a thank you. Thank you is another magic word, that when we say thank you to somebody, then that person is pleased, and then next time he will do another good deed for us. But if we don't say thank you, then we'll say he didn't even thank me for it, so I won't do it again. I won't do this good thing for him again. Similarly, even God wants to be thanked. Then he says, the more you thank me, the more I will increase your blessings. أولئك جزاهم مغفرة من ربهم وجنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ونعم أجر العاملين. They are the ones whose reward is salvation from their Lord, مغفرة من ربهم, from their Lord. Gardens with, what is the reward? Gardens with rivers running by, in which they will abide forever. What an excellent reward for those who do good. So those who are doing good deeds, and what are the good deeds? The good deeds are all those deeds which have been taught to us by the prophets. So these people, all the good qualities that we are reading about, the God conscious, the pious, and the muttaqeen, not but actually meaning the muttaqeen, these are the people who are a blessing, not just for their families, for their fellow beings or the fellow believers, but for all mankind, because they have these very strict moral values, and they are not prejudiced, and they rise above petty squabbles. Therefore, they are a blessing for all mankind. قد خلت من قبلكم سنن فسيروا في الأرض فانظروا كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين. Examples can be found in those who passed before you. Sunanun is the plural of sunnah. It means the way of somebody. In fact, the word we use mostly, the word sunnah that we use is mostly in connection with the example of the Prophet. But in the Quran, it also says Sunnatullah, that means the way of God. So that means any kind of action or behavior that is done repeatedly, that is the way of that person. or that being. So examples can be found in those who passed before you. So go about the earth and see for yourself the end of those who denied. The end of those who denied, that means those people who did not accept their prophets, did not believe in their prophets, and did not follow them. And those who were destroyed in the end, some of those, the ruins of those civilizations, or even now they exist on the earth, and people are being asked to go and look at them for themselves to learn how the non-believers came to a bad end. So even in the earlier nations, those with the above good qualities were given success, and with the bad qualities, of course, they were punished. Haza bayanul linnasi hudam wa mu'izatul lil muttaqin. This is a narration for people and a guidance and sincere advice for the God-fearing, for the muttaqin. Taqwa is a word with very wide meanings. It can also mean abstinence. Abstinence means to stay away from all the things that are harmful, the things which we have been told we should stay away from. Hazrat Umar Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu was asked, what is taqwa? And then the reply that was given was that if you are passing through a place where there are a lot of thorny bushes, you don't rush through that place, and you don't even walk slowly. You catch all your clothes and hold them tight to yourself so that even the clothes are not caught by the thorns. That means that even a little of the harm is to be avoided. So those people who are muttaqeen, they have this kind of abstinence. They avoid all the harmful things that have been forbidden by God and His prophets. وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do not lose hope and do not become depressed. You will predominate if you are true believers. Now this is of course again in connection with the war that we had read earlier about the war of Uhud. إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلُهُ وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ. If you have been hurt, qarhun means like a wound. So if you have received wounds, or if you have been hurt psychologically or physically, the opposing forces were also hurt similarly. So what had happened in the Battle of Uhud was that they had almost won the war when they almost lost it. And how did that happen? Because the archers whom the Prophet had placed himself, he had said, you stand here and you stand here and you stand here, and do not move from here until you are asked to. And what did they do? When in the beginning the believers were successful and the enemy started to run away in disarray, the enemies left all their belongings behind. So these archers became a little greedy for a little while, and they could just see the spoils of war. And they just left their positions and they started collecting the goods that the enemy had left behind. And then what happened? We have already discussed this. I think that Khalid bin Walid at that time had not become a Muslim. He was still in the opposing forces, and he realized that the people who were giving support from the back had left their positions. So we will just they took a big circle around the hill, and they came and attacked from behind. And this is how about 70 people were killed from the Muslims, and many were wounded. 70 were shaheed. But here God is consoling these believers, because they did want to fight in the name of God, but they had sort of made a little mistake. So it is being said, if you have been hurt, never mind, they were also hurt similarly. And these days of winning and losing, we circulate between people so that the believers can become manifest to God and also to take some martyrs from among you. Winning and losing, ayyamu nudawiluha bainan nas. This can apply to this current situation that is being discussed about the battle, but it can also apply to our everyday lives. We see how at one time some people were really doing well, and either they were famous or they had a lot of wealth and they were successful in whatever they were doing and they were very happy. And then something happened and they lost their possession. And then they were not, neither so rich nor so healthy nor so successful. So these are trials that we have to go through. And this is what is being said here, that these are the days which we keep circulating between people, the days of winning and losing, so that the believers become manifest to God, so that we can see who are the true believers. You see that it is said that when we are going through a difficult phase, then we should be patient, steadfast. And when we are winning and we are being successful, then we should be grateful. So if we forget to do these two things, then we are getting into trouble. And also here, God explains another purpose why they lost. Because if all of them had, won that, if they had won, that means none of them would have died, and then there would have been no shaheed, no martyrs. So this is why God says that we also wanted to take some martyrs from among you. And Wallahu la yuhibbu zalimeen. That means God does not like the transgressors. وَلَيُمَحِّصَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَمْحَقَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And so that God might strengthen those who are believers and destroy the unbelievers. أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَعْلَمِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا مِنْكُمْ وَيَعْلَمَ الصَّابِرِينَ. Do you think you can enter paradise when God has not yet seen those who have fought in His way from amongst you and has not yet seen the steadfast? Seen? Why does God need to see people who are steadfast or who are weak or who are strong? This is because God is just. He knows exactly, in His infinite knowledge, He knows that this person is going to do such and such. But God does not catch a person, He does not punish a person until he has committed that act, that deed. So here the believers are being consoled, and we also know that except for this one war, most of the wars that the battles that they took part in it, the Muslims were successful. Another very interesting piece that you read sometimes is that piece of news, you might say, is that when the news of Uhud reached the women in Medina, they were fighting very close to Medina. In fact, some of the young men had advised the Prophet that we would like to fight out in the open, but the more experienced men were saying we should fight close to Medina. We will be able to defeat them here. But the young men were very, enthusiastic, and they wanted to maybe taste the Shahada. So when this news reached the women in Medina that so many Muslims had died, some of them became very impatient and they started out for Uhud. And when they learnt on the way that the Prophet, the first thing they would ask was about the safety of the Prophet, because the news of the Prophet's being wounded had also reached Medina. So when they heard that the Prophet was safe and alive, they were so relieved that they thanked God, in spite of the fact that their own very close relatives had been martyred. So that shows the level of their strength of their faith. وَلَقَدْ كُنْتُمْ تَمَنَّوْنَ الْمَوْتَ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ تَلْقَوْهُ فَقَدْ رَأَيْتُمُوهُ وَأَنْتُمْ تَنْظُرُونَ. You used to wish for death before you were faced with it, so now you have seen it with your own eyes. This is as a reference to the same thing that some young people especially were wishing for martyrdom, for shahadat. Now this next 144 is a very important verse. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ. قد خلت من قبله الرسل فإن مات أو قتل انقلبتم على أعقابكم ومن ينقلب على عقبيه فلن يضر الله شيئا وسيجزي الله الشاكرين. Muhammad is none but the messenger of God. Many messengers have passed before him. If he dies or is killed, will you turn back on your heels? For he who turns back will not harm God at all. God will soon reward the grateful. Now, even some of the very important companions like Hazrat Usman Ghani, who was the third Khalifa, even he did not stay in his place where he was supposed to. And that was because he had the news of the Prophet being, the rumor that the Prophet had died, that paralyzed him. And he was not able to follow the instructions that were given to him. And he was not doing it as a kind of a disobedience. So now this verse was relieved that Muhammad is just a messenger of God. And many messengers have passed before him. That means they came into this world and then they died and they left this world. So if he dies or is killed, will you turn back on your heels? When you run away, will you forget his instructions? For he who turns back will not harm God at all. God will soon reward the grateful. This verse was also recited at the time when the Prophet actually died, when he actually left this world in Medina. Of course, people were, out of their senses. They just could not accept this. They loved him so much. And Hazrat Umar, was a very impulsive kind of person, and he took out his sword and he said, anyone who says that the Prophet is dead, I'm going to kill him. So at that time, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq recited this verse and reminded him that God has told us that he is a prophet of God, and if anything happens to him naturally, he will leave this world like the other prophets, and then we have to keep on doing what he had asked us to do. And on hearing the recitation of this verse, he calmed down a little bit. وَمَا كَانَ لِنَفْسٍ أَن تَمُوتَ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ كِتَابًا مُؤَجَّلًا وَمَنْ يُرِدْ ثَوَابَ الدُّنْيَا نُؤْتِهِ مِنْهَا وَمَنْ يُرِدْ ثَوَابَ الْآخِرَةِ نُؤْتِهِ مِنْهَا فَسَنَجْزِي الشَّاكِرِينَ. It is not possible for a person to die except by the leave of God. The time is ordained. The time of death is fixed for everybody. So this also gives Muslims the courage to fight till the end. Most of the Muslims to fight bravely in a war, because they know that the time of my death is fixed. I can't run away from it. And also, if I die in the cause of God, then I know I will become a shaheed. And the shaheed has a very high station. So they are able to fight very courageously. For the one who desires gain in this world, we will give him from it. Sawab ad-dunya. Sawab means gain or profit or reward. So whoever wants sawab ad-dunya, who wants gain from this world, we will give him from this world. And if there is one who desires gain in the hereafter, we will give him from it. We will soon reward the grateful. Grateful here is used, shakirin. Actually, we're talking about martyrs, and gratefulness means that this martyr was grateful for the life that had been given to him, and he's grateful for the blessing that this opportunity that he's being given to become a martyr who has a very high station. And he's also grateful for having been in the fold of Islam, either having been born a Muslim or having accepted Islam later. So all these things here he is grateful for. Okay, now we have to read ayat number 146. وَكَأَيِّن مِّن نَبِيٍّ قَاتَلَ مَعَهُ رَبِّيُّونَ كَثِيرٌ فَمَا وَهَنُوا لَمَا أَصَابَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَمَا ضَعُفُوا وَمَا اسْتَكَانُوا وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الصَّابِرِينَ. Many of those who were really totally devoted to God, Rabbaniyuna, that means like a darwish who doesn't care about this world, who doesn't even make an effort to earn his daily bread, earn his living. He is all the time occupied in remembering God. So he's a darwish. Many of those totally devoted to God have fought alongside the prophets. Even those people who were not, focused on the world and life and death, they also fought with the prophets. They did not lose hope because of the adversity faced by them in the way of God, and neither did they show weakness, nor did they give up. God loves the steadfast. The steadfast are the sabirins, those who do sabr, those who do not give up easily. وَمَا كَانَ قَوْلَهُمْ إِلَّا أَنْ قَالُوا رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا ذُنُوبَنَا وَإِسْرَافَنَا فِي أَمْرِنَا وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا وَانصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. Their speech was not without saying, O our Lord, forgive us our sins and our trespasses in our deeds, and make us steadfast. Sabbit aqtamana, that means that our feet might become steadfast, fixed in one place, not ready to run away, and help us against the party of the unbelievers. So their speech, whose speech? The people who were muttaqeen, and they just followed the instructions. They used to pray like this, O Lord, forgive us our sins and our trespasses and our deeds, and make us steadfast, and help us against the party of the unbelievers. If you remember when we read about Prophet Dawood alayhi salam and the Bani Israelis, and those people at that time were also very, and then they came to a river or a stream, and they were not allowed to drink to their fill from it. They just could drink one little palmful. And those who drank just a palmful, they were exactly like these people, and their prayer also sounded just like this prayer. And they said how many times a small party has routed a large party just because of their faith. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu in tuti'ul lazina kafaru yaruddukum ala aqabikum fatanqalibu khasirin. O believers, if you follow the unbelievers, they will turn you back on your heels, then you will return as losers. So this is from the historical account that in the beginning, those people who did not want to believe the Prophet, for whatever reason they had in their mind, they were trying to poison the minds of the believers all the time. And here this is supposed to be a reference, according to Hazrat Ibn Abbas, that Huzaifa and Ammar, they were being approached by some of these people who were non-believers, and they were trying to turn them back to their original faith. So they are being told here, if you follow the unbelievers, they will turn you back on your heels, then you will return as losers. You will become khasirin, those who will not gain any success. Balillahu mawlakum wa huwa khairun nasirin. But God is your friend, and He is the best of helpers. Mawla is a word which has been translated as friend, as helper, also as protecting friend. Sometimes in certain places people have translated it as Lord. So He is your friend. That means the only friend you have really is God, and He is the best of helpers. So just ask Him for help, and do not look at all these other people and do not listen to them. سَنُلْقِي فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الرُّعْبَ بِمَا أَشْرَكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا وَمَأْوَاهُمُ النَّارُ وَبِئْسَ مَثْوَى الظَّالِمِينَ. We will soon make fear to enter the hearts of the unbelievers for ascribing partners to God, for which He did not reveal any proof. Bima ashraku. Ashraku, that means they did shirk. And we will make fear to enter the hearts. That here the word used in Arabic is robe. We will just talk about robe a little bit for ascribing partners to God, bima ashraku, and for which He did not reveal any proof. That means there is no revealed book in which it is said you can worship such and such deity or make such a God and worship it yourself. So all these people are being described here as their abode is the fire, a terrible place for the transgressors, for the zalimin, those who cross the limits. وَلَقَدْ صَدَقَهُمُ اللَّهُ وَعْدَهُ إِذْ تَحُسُّونَهُم بِإِذْنِهِ حَتَّى إِذَا فَشِلْتُمْ فَتَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ وَعَصَيْتُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا أَرَاكُمْ مَا تُحِبُّونَ مِنْكُمْ مَن يُرِيدُ الدُّنْيَا وَمِنْكُمْ مَن يُرِيدُ يُرِيدُ الْآخِرَةَ ثُمَّ صَرَفَكُمْ عَنْهُمْ لِيَبْتِلَكُمْ وَلَقَدْ عَفَا عَنْكُمْ. And indeed God made good His promise. What was the promise that He made good? That if they fought in the cause of God and were steadfast, that they would always be victorious. Promise to you, when you had the upper hand over the enemy, that means God had given them the success, that when they were being obedient and they were fighting with a very clean heart, they knew they were fighting in the cause of God, then they did get success. But when they made their mistake, then of course they were caught. When you had the upper hand over the enemy wisely, until you showed lack of courage and started quarreling about the command of the Prophet, and then you disobeyed. So we've already gone through this before, that out of 50 archers, 40 left their position. So you can see how vulnerable this side became. And also then they got a chance to attack the Prophet in spite of so many people trying to protect him. And the Prophet always carried a sword with him to the battlefield, but he never used the sword. And we'll discuss that later as to why he never used. One of the reasons that I understand why he never used the sword. So among the followers who were steadfast was Hazrat Abu Bakr, Hazrat Umar, Abdullah bin Jubair, and also this woman that we have spoken about. She's popularly known as, her kunyat is Ammara, and her name was Nasiba binte Kaab. And this is a hadith from Sahih Bukhari, that the Prophet is reported to have said that to my right and to my left, whichever way I looked, I found Ammara defending me. So this was the strength of her faith. Now those who had made a dash for the spoils of war, they wanted all these worldly goods, the arms and the ammunition, the food, the clothes, whatever they had carried. They had forgotten that the Prophet always distributed the spoils himself, and he saw to it that each and every soldier got his rightful share of the gains. Allah zu fadlin alal mu'mineen. Yeah, we've already read this. You were driven back by them so that He might try you, but then He forgave you. God is full of kindness for the believers. Istus'iduna wa la taluna ala ahadim wa rasulu yad'ukum fi ukhrakum fa asabakum ghamman bi ghammin likayla tahzanu ala ma fatakum wa la ma asabakum wallahu khabirum bima ta'malun. Remember, you were running away and would not even turn back to look at anyone, and the messenger was calling you from the back. What was the messenger doing? He was saying, O slaves of Allah, come to me. O slaves of Allah, come to me. He was trying to organize them, to make them realize that what they were doing, running around, was the wrong thing to do, and also to let them know that He was alive. He was calling them from the back. Then God gave you sorrow for the Prophet's sorrow, so that you might not fret at that which you lost, and neither at that which you suffered. God is aware of what you do. Summa anzala alaykum min ba'dil ghammi amanatan nu'asan yakhsha ta'ifatam minkum wa ta'ifatum qad ahammathum anfusuhum yazunnuna billahi ghayra al-haqqi zannal jahiliyati. Then He sent down on you after suffering peace and drowsiness. So this is supposed to be a kind of blessing that God sent on those who had been steadfast. That in the middle of this war, when all the dead bodies are lying there and the field is full of blood, they were given a kind of peace by this few seconds of, I don't know, it must have been few seconds most probably, of drowsiness, which sort of renewed their strength, and they became strong again to fight back. That overcame a group from among you. The other group was concerned only about itself. They were thinking thoughts about God like the thoughts of the days of ignorance. They were saying, do we have any part in this matter? Now there were also some يَقُولُونَ هَلْ لَنَا مِنَ الْأَمْرِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. Do we have any part in this matter? قُلْ إِنَّ الْأَمْرَ كُلَّهُ لله يخفون في أنفسهم ما لا يبدون لك يقولون لو كان لنا من الأمر شيء ما قتلنا هاهنا. This is a long verse, so I was trying to read it in parts. So they said, do we have any part in this? These are some of the hypocrites, or those people whose faith is weak. They are hiding in their hearts what they do not reveal to you. They say, قُلْ لَوْ كُنْتُمْ فِي بُيُوتِكُمْ لَبَرَزَ الَّذِينَ كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقَتْلُ إِلَى مَضَاجِعِهِمْ وَلِيَبْتَلِيَ اللَّهُ مَا فِي صُدُورِكُمْ وَلِيُمَحِّصَ مَا فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ بِذَاتِ الصُّدُورِ. They say, if we had any say in this, then we would not have been killed. So they think it was a wrong strategy to come to this war, and that they also are now wishing that they had not taken part in it, and then their companions and other people would not have been killed. Say, even if you were secure in your homes, those on whom death had been ordained would surely have come out to reach their place of death. This is so that God might try you about whatever is in your hearts and then cleanse them. For God is aware of the secrets of the hearts. So this is the difference in the matter of the belief about death. This is the difference between the believer and the non-believer. Firstly, the believer knows that his time of death is fixed. No one can change it. And by running away, he cannot change his time of death. Also, there was another point about this. Okay, we'll come to it, then I'll talk about it. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَلَّوْا مِنْكُمْ يَوْمَ الْتَقَى الْجَمْعَانِ إِنَّمَا اسْتَزَلَّهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ بِبَعْضِ مَا كَسَبُوا وَلَقَدْ عَفَا اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ حَلِيمٌ. Indeed, those who turned their backs from among you on the day when the two forces faced each other were weakened by shaitan because of some act that they committed. Indeed, God forgave them, for He is the much forgiving, the patiently dignified. So since there was some of the leading companions, Sahaba, among those who had stayed, who had sort of disobeyed or become too paralyzed to act, this is why God is forgiving them. He says, God forgave them, for He is the much forgiving, the patiently dignified. This is the end of our ruku. This is how much we were supposed to read. I had intended to read a hadith in which there is mention of robe, but I guess we'll have to do it next time. Okay, then we'll do the dua first. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين آمين ثم آمين ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين ثم آمين. All right, thank you everyone.